Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. How many angels can perch on a pinhead? How many stars illuminate the night sky? How long does eternity last? While the first two questions elude me, I've discovered the answer to the third. 4 years, 3 weeks, 5 days, 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 50 seconds, more or less. I once thought "till death do us part" meant forever. Naive, wasn't I? On Friday, June 15th, at exactly 3:14 p.m., reality shredded that belief. A sheriff's deputy strode up to my desk, handed me a pristine envelope, and said simply, "You've been served." Then he vanished, leaving a silence filled by the weight of my colleagues' stares. Trembling, I unfolded the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My chest tightened, and for a fleeting moment I thought it might be the end. It wasn't. The blows didn't stop there. Attached to the petition was a restraining order, effectively barring me from entering my own home, a house I had owned before I even met Viviana. Calling her for an explanation was out of the question. The order explicitly forbade it. She swore under oath that she feared for her safety, this woman who had shared my bed the night before. Twice, or rather, I had loved her. She had simply been present. With nowhere else to go, I carried the clothes on my back to my mother's house and reclaimed my childhood room. I was dazed. Until that moment, I'd lived in the blissful ignorance of someone who believed in a future, children, old age, and the enduring companionship of a best friend. Now, everything was unraveling. The following month was an endless cycle of court hearings and financial scrutiny. Even my spending on sandwiches was dissected. It was a torment I couldn't have imagined, a level of suffering that felt as though it belonged in Dante's darkest visions. And through it all, one question haunted me. Why? When life reduces you to rubble, thinking becomes an enemy. I surrendered, agreeing to every demand. My one plea to Viviana was for an answer. She never faced me directly, choosing instead to deliver her explanation through her attorney. He handed me a letter, typed, impersonal, double-spaced. It wasn't even handwritten. From her words, I learned the brutal truth. I had done nothing wrong. Viviana had rekindled her relationship with Charles Winston III, her college sweetheart and self-proclaimed soulmate. He was the man who had taken her virginity, which she once described to me as her wedding gift. Their romance had been thwarted years ago by Charles's disapproving father. Fate intervened when the elder Winston died suddenly of a heart attack, freeing Charles to reunite with her. The letter's final line delivered the killing blow. "I'm divorcing you because I respect you too much to have an affair." Her respect left me feeling hollow and discarded. I couldn't finish reading. 2 days later, the divorce was finalized. No fault, simple, lifeless. Leaving the courthouse, I quit my job, packed up my life, and set my sights on California. Why California? Because I'd never seen the Pacific Ocean. At a Ford dealership, I traded my Mustang for a pickup truck outfitted with a camper. It would be my home for the foreseeable future. My mother begged me to stay, but I assured her that leaving was the only way I could endure. I drove west, avoiding highways in favor of back roads, with no destination beyond the horizon. My plan was simple. Find physical work that required strength but no thought, and never linger anywhere for more than 2 weeks. One evening, I rolled into a small town as the sun dipped below the skyline. A help wanted sign glowed in the window of the Lone Bar on Main Street. Over a beer, I inquired about the job. The bartender was hesitant, explaining that it involved long hours, minimum wage, 2 meals a day, and tips that weren't guaranteed. Beer, however, was on the house. I replied, "If there's a spot for my camper, I'll take it." He pointed to the gravel lot out back, tossed me an apron, and told me to start serving tables. That marked the beginning of my new life. On the 7th day of this journey, I met a woman 10 years my senior, still alluring in her way. That night I had intimacy for the second time in my life. It was, pleasurable. True to my plan, I moved on 2 weeks later. The bar owner, Phil, handed me an envelope with my pay and said, "You're welcome back any time." Over the next 6 months, I drifted between diners, bars, and restaurants, working 12 different jobs. Along the way, I met women who listened to my story and offered fleeting moments of solace. None of it filled the void, but it dulled the edges. Winter arrived as I reached the Rockies. Snow fell so heavily that the world seemed to vanish into white. In desperation, I pulled into a small Colorado town, eerily still as if its residents had already retreated to warmth and safety. The only light came from the police station. I parked and explained my predicament to a deputy, who graciously let me stay in their lot. He even called a nearby diner to arrange a hot meal. The diner's owner, an older woman with a thick Italian accent, greeted me with surprising warmth. After a brief study, she said, "My grandson told me about you. You'll freeze in that camper. I have a cot in the storage room. It's not much, but it's better than the truck." Her kindness was overwhelming. I devoured the best meal I'd had in months and gratefully accepted her offer. Before dawn the next morning, I woke to the comforting sounds of Mrs. Villano cooking. My life was far from what I had envisioned, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like it was moving forward. Through the frosted window pane, a snow-covered world stretched out before me, serene and untouched. As I dressed, my eyes wandered to a tidy row of paint cans stacked against the wall. Their neat alignment piqued my curiosity, and I asked about them while exchanging pleasantries. "My late husband, bless his heart, bought those years ago," she said with a wistful smile, "but he never got around to using them, not once." Recalling my days of house painting to pay for college, I made an offer. I'd paint her place in exchange for meals. She agreed without hesitation, setting the stage for a chapter of my life I could never have foreseen. In return for room, board, and some kitchen help during lunch hours, I'd transform her restaurant. Every morning I climbed a ladder and scrubbed the tin ceiling clean, preparing it for a vibrant makeover. For 5 days straight, I painted bold, striking colors that turned the space into something spectacular, so stunning it could rival a masterpiece. One afternoon she clasped her hands in delight and exclaimed, "Peter, it's extraordinary. You're a true artist." The next day, as the snowplows cleared the roads, customers began to trickle in. Each visitor tilted their head back to admire the ceiling, their faces alight with amazement. Some young women stopped by too, intrigued by the artist behind the work. Invitations to social outings soon filled my evenings, but painting took a back seat when the waitress, Mrs. Villano, didn't show up one day. "I can handle this," I assured her, stepping in to manage the tables while she ran the kitchen. To my surprise, we quickly became an unbeatable team. That night, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, skipping my usual ritual of rereading Viviana's letter. For the first time in what felt like forever, I woke to the genuine crowing of a rooster, though I later discovered it was Mrs. Villano's doing, coaxing the bird awake herself. Between meals, I shadowed her in the kitchen, absorbing her culinary techniques like a sponge. As she hummed romantic Italian songs while cooking, I found myself joining in. Soon our lessons evolved. She began teaching me Italian as we worked, and under her patient guidance, I picked up the language quickly. Our conversations shifted into her native tongue, and though I wasn't perfect, I could follow her stories and instructions with ease. When spring came, we planted an herb garden. By the time autumn rolled around, I had mastered winemaking and preserving food. What started as a brief arrangement stretched into 18 months of learning, growing, and bonding. One bright spring morning, I completed my final painting task and told her it was time for me to move on. She understood and sent me off with gifts, a handwritten recipe book and a case of her homemade wine. As we said goodbye, she handed me an envelope addressed to me. "When you get to San Francisco, find my cousin Anthony," she instructed. "Tell him you're the son I always wished I had." Taking my time, I journeyed to California, stopping to explore along the way. I gambled a bit in Reno, marveled at the Grand Canyon, and savored every moment. A month later, I found myself having lunch at Fisherman's Wharf. The next morning, I arrived at the address written on the envelope. The location was a quaint Italian restaurant nestled in Nob Hill, surrounded by similar eateries. The rich aroma of simmering sauces and fresh bread filled the air. The restaurant appeared closed, but I knocked on the door. A short, bald man in a chef's jacket peeked out from the kitchen and barked, "We're closed!" I knocked again, and this time he opened the door fully. "What do you want?" he asked, suspiciously eyeing me. I handed him the envelope. "This is for you," I said simply. He called out something in rapid Italian to someone inside. "Boss, the guy who knows everything is here," he hollered. A man named Tony emerged, glanced at the letter and laughed aloud. Thinking I didn't understand, he read it for everyone's amusement. "This crazy cousin of mine says I should hand over my kitchen to this stranger and let him cook." The staff laughed, their skepticism evident. Tony's attention shifted to my belongings, a cardboard box and some overstuffed bags. "What's in there? Your whole life?" he teased. I opened the box to reveal 4 bottles of wine. Curious, he poured himself a taste. After a sip, his demeanor changed. "Who made this?" he asked, clearly impressed. "I did," I explained. "I learned from Mrs. Villano." "Well," he said, nodding thoughtfully, "if you can cook like you can make wine, there might be a spot for you here." Tony called for his daughters, Gina and Anne-Marie. They walked in, a stunning pair. "Nice to meet you," I stammered, overwhelmed. Anne-Marie greeted me warmly, but Gina's skeptical glare said it all. "So, you're the legendary chef from Colorado," she said, her tone laced with sarcasm. The staff burst into laughter. From that day forward, they jokingly called me the legend. Tony put me to the test immediately. "Let's see what this legend can cook," he said, grinning. Gina remained critical, her sharp tongue keeping me on my toes, while Anne-Marie seemed more amused by the whole situation. When Gina scolded me in rapid-fire Italian, I responded in kind, surprising everyone. Our heated exchange ended when Tony stepped in. "Save it for later," he said, smirking. "Your boyfriend has work to do." "Boyfriend?" Gina snapped, storming off. "He's lucky if he's not washing dishes tomorrow." And just like that, my new life began. Tony let out a hearty laugh and quipped, "Looks like she's got her eye on you. Now get to it. There's soup and a couple of specialties waiting for your magic tonight." With bags full of fresh herbs and spices in hand, I sent up a silent prayer, greeted the crew with warmth, and got straight to work. As the evening unfolded, the kitchen hummed with lively Italian chatter as we prepared each dish. That night, my cioppino, a traditional Italian fisherman's stew brimming with Dungeness crab, shrimp, clams, and bay scallops, vanished from the menu within the first hour. Not long after, my linguine alle mollec, crafted with freshly caught crab from the nearby coast, was completely sold out. The highlight of the evening came when a waiter revealed that 2 guests had nearly come to blows over the last serving of my gnocchi smothered in house-made basil pesto. Tony barged into the kitchen, enveloped me in a bear hug, and declared, "We've got a star chef in the making." Anne-Marie chimed in enthusiastically, her pride unmistakable. Meanwhile, Gina remained cloistered in her office, buried in accounting. Though I had a waiter deliver samples of my creations to her, she kept silent. As the night drew to a close, I thanked the kitchen team for their efforts and felt a deep sense of belonging. This place was my new home. Still, I resolved to change one thing: the atmosphere. Mrs. Villano's advice echoed in my mind. Music enhances every meal. From that moment on, I vowed to encourage the team to sing while we worked. The Winston family built their fortune in real estate. Charles Winston I, the family's patriarch, made his mark during the Great Depression by focusing on foreclosures. Some critics claimed he seized farms more than he bought them. Following World War II, he shifted gears to suburban developments, converting farmland into uniform neighborhoods for returning soldiers with government-backed loans. The homes lacked originality, with only minor differences in their shutters or shingles. Charles Winston II, who despised being called Junior, carried the family business forward. During the economic downturn of the 70s, he quietly acquired options on struggling farms. By the real estate boom of the late 80s, that investment had more than paid off. Construction trailers turned into model homes, and money flowed freely. His son, Charles Winston III, better known as C.W., was quick to take the reins. He married Viviana, but their tropical honeymoon turned disastrous when both came down with a severe intestinal parasite. The resort denied responsibility, blaming local street food vendors. Once back home, C.W. announced bold changes for the company. My father had his time, but now it's my turn. Starting today, we're playing offense. Find me farmers eager to sell. However, CW3 lacked the sharp instincts of his forebears. Overconfident and self-absorbed, he ignored sound advice and overpaid for farmland. When the housing market bubble burst in year 7, he put everything on the line, pushing his assets to the limit. While others pulled back, CW took reckless risks, borrowing heavily to purchase a competitor's holdings. By the time the Great Recession hit, he was left with 500 barren acres and 50 half-finished homes, and no buyers. His desperation led to dubious schemes to offload inventory. Contractors went unpaid, lawsuits piled up, and banks began demanding repayment as collateral values plummeted. Calls for immediate payment became relentless. CW liquidated what little remained, including inherited stocks, insurance policies, and even his mother's jewelry. But it only delayed the inevitable. On the day his home was to be seized, CW poured himself a stiff drink, retrieved his father's cherished shotgun, and ended his life. His funeral featured a closed casket. Viviana discovered him just moments before a deputy arrived with eviction papers, cementing it as the worst day of her life. But her struggles didn't end there. CW's financial misdeeds soon surfaced, adding further chaos to her world. "You promised Dad you'd walk me down the aisle," my sister Danny insisted, her wedding just weeks away. There was one major hitch. My ex-wife Viviana, the groom's cousin, would be there along with her mother. 5 years had passed since I last saw her, and I had no desire to change that. But Danny's persistence wore me down, and I reluctantly agreed to fly to Chicago for her big day. At the gym, I couldn't help but admire my reflection in a sharp tuxedo. The timing was perfect as the limo pulled up outside the church. Bridesmaids and groomsmen lingered near the entrance, clearly curious if the estranged brother would make an appearance. Stepping out, I was met with the majestic strains of an organ. By my side were Gina and Anne-Marie, stunning twins in designer gowns, each featuring a daring thigh-high slit revealing intricate lace stockings. A month earlier, I had lamented my lack of a date, prompting both sisters to offer their company. When I jokingly said I couldn't choose between them, Gina, the older by 5 minutes, suggested I bring them both. Anne-Marie eagerly agreed, sealing the deal. When Danny later asked about my second guest, I teased her with a cryptic response. "You'll see when you're walking down the aisle." As I escorted the twins to the bride's family pew, cameras flashed, heads turned, and a low buzz of whispers filled the room. My mother's stunned expression was unforgettable. "Wow," someone murmured. "They look amazing." Curious glances and craning necks followed us down the aisle. Friends from school erupted into applause, adding to the spectacle. I spotted Viviana and her mother among the crowd. Time had been unkind to her. She appeared heavier and more tired, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Both twins gave me a kiss on the cheek before I resumed my role as Danny's brother. Meeting Wendy in the narthex, I complimented her glowing appearance. She smirked and replied, "You're impossible. No one can top that entrance." As the wedding march began, we took our places for the procession. Later, Dawn asked me to give a toast during the reception. Though public speaking wasn't my forte, I agreed to say a few heartfelt words. The evening became one for the memory books. I struggled to piece my thoughts together when my attention wandered to an older couple seated alone at the groom's table. Their quiet composure stood out in stark contrast to the lively chatter around the room. Their presence intrigued me, and I soon learned they were the groom's grandparents, having traveled all the way from Italy to be part of this joyous occasion. They didn't speak a word of English. Though I felt an instinctive urge to avoid engaging with them, their peaceful smiles and the ease with which they seemed to exist amidst a sea of strangers stirred something deep within me. My mind filled with imagined conversations, many involving me demanding an explanation from Viviana about her once earnest promise of "till death do us part." But instead, I chose a different path. In fluent Italian, I invited the couple to stand and embraced them warmly. Turning to the crowd, I asked everyone to lift their glasses in honor of this remarkable patriarch and matriarch who had joined us. The applause was thunderous as I called out, "Brad, Wendy, please join me here." A hushed curiosity swept over the room as I asked the guests to extend their right hands. I began recounting a poignant memory. On our father's deathbed, he had placed my sister's hands in mine, covering them with his own. His voice, heavy with the weight of finality, had said, "I won't be here to protect you, so I'm entrusting Peter to look after you. He will be your friend, your guide, your protector." Then, turning to me, he had added, "Do not fail me." Addressing the gathering, I explained that tonight I was passing that solemn responsibility to Wendy's husband. "John," I said, "I entrust Wendy's care to you. From this moment on, you are her best friend, her teacher, her protector. Don't let me down." The room filled with admiring murmurs, all except Viviana, whose sobs broke through the applause. Her mother's attempts to comfort her were in vain. As dinner came to an end, the quartet on stage began performing a series of adequate but uninspiring songs. Their music was pleasant, but the vocals lacked the power to truly capture the room. That's when Gina and Anne-Marie pulled me onto the dance floor, their hands tugging at mine with playful determination. Grabbing the microphone, they quickly dismissed the guitarist and drummer, daring the keyboardist to keep up with their infectious energy. Gina turned to the crowd and announced with dramatic flair, "Ladies and gentlemen, after 3 long years away in San Francisco, I present to you a legend." The room erupted in cheers. Years ago, we had spent countless evenings singing together at a small restaurant, and the old instincts returned effortlessly. For the next 2 hours, we serenaded Wendy and her new husband with heartfelt love songs. Gina and Anne-Marie's harmonies were flawless, filling the room with angelic melodies. The groom's grandfather stole the spotlight with a spirited tarantella, bringing everyone to their feet. The groom twirled his grandmother around the dance floor, their joy lighting up the evening. Dan and I stood with our mother, arm in arm, quietly basking in a sense of pride and contentment. During a break in the festivities, my former mother-in-law approached me cautiously. "Peter, could we have a word?" she asked softly. "Good evening, Mrs. Bennington," I replied coolly. "Viviana has been trying to talk to you," she continued, "but you've been avoiding her. She wants to apologize and ask for your forgiveness." "That won't be necessary," I said firmly. "It's been a long time since anything Mrs. Winston has said mattered to me." "Please, Peter," she implored. "Don't shut her out. Just hear her out." "No," I replied, my voice resolute. "But there is something I'd like to give you." Reaching into my wallet, I pulled out a worn piece of paper. "The day your daughter left me," I began. Her lawyer handed me this. I must have read it 1,000 times, my tears soaking its edges. But the tears are gone now, and so is the pain of her betrayal. "This," I said, handing her the paper, "is the last connection I have to your daughter. Take it. She's yours now." Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there as I rejoined the celebration. I never looked back. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Did you have the time of your life? Marcus's voice was calm, almost casual, but his words carried weight. Tracy glanced nervously to the left, then the right, her eyes finally landing on the table. She avoided his gaze, her discomfort evident in the faint sheen of sweat forming on her upper lip. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably, seconds creeping by like hours. With a cautious sideways glance, she tried to read his expression. Marcus's face revealed nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a quiet neutrality that made the air between them heavy. Tracy wondered if his composure was worse than the explosion of fury she had anticipated. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, the tension in her chest easing just slightly. Marcus leaned forward, resting his chin on one hand, his elbow perched casually on the edge of the table. The soft, steady rhythm of his breathing filled the space between them, a stark contrast to her pounding heart. He said nothing, waiting for her to speak. Tracy reached for her wine glass, taking a measured sip in an attempt to gather herself. Finally, she exhaled and spoke, her voice barely audible. "Yes, I did," she admitted. "But you already knew that." "I did," Marcus replied evenly. "But hearing you say it matters. People sometimes change their perspective when they reflect on something. What seemed thrilling in the moment might not feel the same afterward, or it might still carry the same intensity. The passion, the pleasure, doesn't always fade." Tracy stared at him, absorbing his words. When did he become so introspective, she wondered. She took another breath, feeling the weight of his calm scrutiny. "So," Marcus continued, his tone unchanging, "do you regret it?" Her eyes lifted, meeting his at last. His dark gaze felt like a blade slicing through her defenses, cold, piercing, and devoid of the warmth she had once relied on. She spoke hesitantly, her voice trembling. "No, I don't regret it. It was an incredible experience. But I didn't mean to hurt you. It wasn't about that. For me, it was unforgettable." Marcus watched her intently, his expression unyielding. Tracy's gaze faltered once more, her finger tracing the rim of her glass as if searching for answers. "And because it was so unforgettable," Marcus said, his voice taking on a sharp edge, "you'll want to do it again, and again, which means I'll keep getting hurt, again and again." The gravity of his words hit her like a physical blow. Tracy's head shot up, her eyes wide with realization. "Marcus, I love you. I've loved you every single day since we got married," she pleaded, her voice shaking with desperation. Marcus shook his head slowly. "That's not love, Tracy. That's guilt. You're sorry because you betrayed me, not because you don't want to feel that way again. Deep down, you know you would, no matter how much it hurts me." His tone remained cold and detached, each word cutting deeper. He drained his glass of wine, the sound of it clinking against the table the only noise in the room. Rising, he walked to the kitchen, poured himself another glass of red wine, and returned to his seat, acutely aware of her eyes following his every move. When he sat down, Tracy's voice broke the silence, trembling as she spoke. "I'll admit it. I want to feel it again. It was the most exhilarating thing I've ever experienced. But I don't want to lose us, Marcus. 16 years of marriage, what we have is worth fighting for." Tears welled up in her eyes as she searched his face for a shred of compassion, a hint of the man she had shared her life with. But Marcus remained stone-faced, his expression as unyielding as granite. "You want both," he said flatly, "but you can't have both. That's not how this works. I never thought you could be this selfish." Her thoughts swirled in a storm of confusion and guilt. Selfish? Was he right? She shifted uneasily in her chair. "I don't want a divorce, Marcus," she whispered, her voice cracking. 16 years. There has to be a way to fix this. I love you." Marcus's expression hardened further, his tone resolute. "No, Tracy, there's no fixing this. It's already broken." His words hit her like a gavel, final and unforgiving. Her mouth opened in protest, her voice rising. "You can't mean that. If you love me, you'd give me another chance." His eyes narrowed, his voice turning icy. "Another chance? I've given you more than enough chances. I know you slept with him 8 times. Tracy's blood ran cold. How could he know? Her mind raced, the name Will Tolliver flashing in her thoughts. He had promised her he wouldn't say a word. Before she could respond, Marcus shattered the mystery. "I confronted him," he said with quiet venom. "It's amazing what a broken tibia can do to loosen someone's tongue." Marcus recounted the confrontation, his voice detached. He had found Will outside a bar, struck his leg with a metal pipe, and watched him collapse. A second blow to the face sealed the younger man's confession. 8 times, over a month. Marcus's voice pierced her thoughts. 8 times, Tracy. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. What Tracy didn't know was that Marcus had uncovered her betrayal long before confronting Will. He had returned home early from a business trip, catching her in the act and silently recording everything. Later, in a hotel room, he watched the video, his worst fears confirmed. Now Marcus's words came like a verdict. "I loved you once, Tracy, but this is the end." Earlier that summer, Marcus felt sure he'd seen the man at a picnic with Tracy. The image of the stranger lingered in his mind, prompting him to grab his laptop and start searching for answers. His efforts soon revealed the man's identity: Will Tolliver, an assistant vice president working in the same office building as Tracy for the past year. The photograph he found depicted a well-dressed, athletic blonde man. Marcus's own observations of Will confirmed the picture's accuracy. He was polished, fit, and undeniably striking. At 32, Will was a full decade younger than both Marcus and Tracy. A troubling thought gnawed at Marcus. Was Tracy's affection no longer his alone? Restless and unable to quiet his mind, he decided to drive home in the middle of the night. At 1 a.m., he parked in the driveway and scanned the house, shrouded in darkness. Slipping inside quietly, he crept toward the bedroom, half expecting to find Tracy and her lover entangled. Instead, the room held only Tracy, sleeping alone in bed. But something felt off. A faint, unsettling scent lingered in the air, a trace of intimacy. Shaken, Marcus said nothing. He closed the door and retreated to the couch in the living room, his thoughts churning. The following morning, Tracy emerged from the bedroom. Naked, she moved to the kitchen to make coffee. The sound woke Marcus, and he waited until she placed her cup on the counter before speaking. "I'll have a cup too, Tracy," he said, his voice breaking the quiet. The sudden sound startled Tracy. Her stomach tightened, and she froze, muttering a quiet curse under her breath. Before she could retreat, Marcus appeared in the kitchen. His eyes locked on the faint marks on her skin, leaving no room for doubt. "It's not what it looks like," Tracy stammered, but Marcus's sarcastic response cut her off. "I'm sure it's not," he said coldly. Tracy tried to leave, but Marcus stepped in her path. He pulled out his phone and pressed play on a recording. Her face drained of color as she watched the footage. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. "Filmed it myself last night," Marcus replied, his voice laced with bitter satisfaction. "Not bad for someone shaking with rage." Tracy's voice faltered. "You were here?" Marcus shrugged. "Oh, don't worry. I'm leaving now. I'll be back tomorrow, just like we planned. That should give you time to clean up and air out the bedroom. Not that I didn't interrupt anything this morning." His nonchalant tone stung. Imagine how humiliating it is to be the oblivious husband who found out this way. Tracy stood frozen as Marcus walked out the door, his indifference leaving her shaken. She knew the consequences of her actions had only begun. Meanwhile, Marcus drove to the room he'd rented. Once inside, he let the grief over his imploding marriage overwhelm him, sobbing uncontrollably before pulling himself together and stepping into the shower. As water cascaded over him, unanswered questions consumed his thoughts. Chief among them was why. Would Tracy ever give him an honest explanation for her betrayal? Until that night, Marcus had never doubted Tracy's love or loyalty. His feelings for her had been unwavering since the day they met in college. They began dating as seniors, and within weeks they were inseparable. 2 years after graduation they married, their bond strengthened by shared ambitions and a prosperous dual-income lifestyle. Children had never been a priority. They agreed to let life decide for them. Their physical intimacy remained vibrant, marked by playfulness and a consistent rhythm. Marcus took pride in ensuring Tracy's satisfaction. But something shifted when Will entered her life. Will's charm and good looks were impossible to ignore. As their professional interactions increased, Tracy found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't felt in years. Subtly, she began dressing more provocatively on days she knew they'd cross paths, indulging in the thrill of flirtation for the first time in her marriage. Casual work dinners followed, which Tracy explained away as late nights at the office. Marcus's trust in her was absolute, leaving no room for suspicion. 6 weeks into their budding partnership, Marcus took a weekend trip, and Tracy informed Will. He wasted no time arranging a Friday night dinner. The evening's flirtation escalated, and when Will invited her to his apartment, Tracy didn't hesitate. That night felt exhilarating, a reawakening of long-dormant desires. For the first time in 18 years, Tracy was with someone other than Marcus, and the experience electrified her. By morning, she lay in Will's bed, feeling alive in a way she hadn't in years. They spent the day together, oscillating between passionate intensity and tender connection. Tracy couldn't help but compare Will to Marcus. Will's confident, magnetic presence left her wanting more. Less than 2 weeks later, she made another excuse to stay late at work, meeting Will at his apartment. Their encounters grew bolder, the secrecy heightening their allure. Tracy returned home frustrated that her time with Will was so fleeting, resenting Marcus's presence for limiting her. 2 weeks later, another of Marcus's weekend trips presented an opportunity. This time, Tracy invited Will to her home. She believed that being in her own space would deepen their connection, and Will saw the gesture as a significant step in their relationship. To him, it was a declaration that Tracy was ready to escalate their affair by sharing the ultimate betrayal, her marital bed. Tracy's relaxed demeanor set the tone for an enjoyable Friday night, and the evening's festivities only enhanced her mood. Her thrill peaked when Marcus made an unexpected entrance during her and Will's second intimate encounter of the night. Despite Marcus's firm intent to pursue a divorce, Tracy refused to accept his decision. Acting on the counsel of her attorney and the judge's directive, the couple was required to participate in 6 sessions of marriage counseling. "Mrs. Rains, what do you hope to achieve through these sessions?" Dr. Albertson inquired at the start of their first meeting. "I want to save my marriage," Tracy answered earnestly. "I know Marcus loves me and I love him. I made a mistake, and I'm ready to prove my commitment to him, no matter what it takes." Dr. Albertson turned to Marcus. "And how do you feel about that, Mr. Rains?" "Let's be clear," Marcus began. "I do love my wife, but I wouldn't call her actions a mistake. A mistake is something accidental, a one-time error. What Tracy did wasn't a mistake. It was a series of deliberate decisions. When someone keeps going back to the same place to satisfy their desires, it's intentional." His voice hardened. "It wasn't an accident, Tracy." "There won't be any more trips to that well," Tracy said softly but with conviction. "From now on, it's just you and me, Marcus. Forever." Marcus shook his head. "Once you went to that well, Tracy, there was no longer a you and me." Throughout the tense exchange, Tracy's unyielding smile stayed firmly in place, a brightness that unsettled Marcus. It felt to him like she was holding on to some hidden truth. Her demeanor didn't go unnoticed by Dr. Albertson, who gave a knowing but subtle smile of her own. Marcus's unease grew. Without a word, Marcus pulled out his phone and played a video. It showed Tracy and Will together in their marital bed. Tracy froze in shock while the counselor attempted unsuccessfully to intervene. Marcus let the video play for the full 10 minutes, sitting silently as both women looked on, stunned. "That was highly inappropriate, Mr. Rains," Dr. Albertson admonished. "If you pull another stunt like that, I'll have to report you to the court. You could be held in contempt." Marcus shrugged. "A few nights in jail might actually help me solidify my resolve to end this charade of a marriage." Leaning forward, his voice grew more intense. "But let's not miss the real issue here. You heard something today that wasn't in the court filings. Tracy's lawyer didn't lie to you outright, but they didn't tell you everything either. Tracy confessed to me that her affair had given her the best intimate experience of her life. She never regretted it for a second. Her only regret was getting caught and hurting my feelings. That's not remorse. That's not a foundation for rebuilding trust or a marriage." "I'd give everything up for you, Marcus," Tracy said, her voice trembling. "How noble of you," Marcus replied with a bitter edge. "You'd give up your lover to keep your husband. Maybe you should explain that to the counselor. I'm done wasting my time here." Dr. Albertson remained silent, her expression betraying a mixture of shock and disbelief. Marcus's words had struck a chord, and the impact was palpable. The session ended abruptly, and with it, the counseling program. 6 months later, their divorce was finalized. Marcus sought therapy to rebuild his life and work through the trust issues he'd developed toward women. Tracy, however, wasted no time reigniting her affair with Will. Even before the divorce papers were finalized, Will had essentially moved into the home she had once shared with Marcus. Though their physical relationship continued, the excitement they once shared began to wane. The passionate thrill that had initially driven their affair gave way to a dull routine. Tracy couldn't help but notice the change. As she reflected on her choices, Tracy was haunted by an ever-growing emptiness. The adrenaline rush of forbidden love had faded, leaving behind an aching void. She found herself questioning whether she had traded a lifetime of genuine love for fleeting moments of excitement. A single tear slipped down her cheek as she wrestled with the enormity of what she had lost. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. I sat motionless, my brain refusing to make sense of the words that had just left Viviana's mouth. After 15 years of marriage, the woman I thought I knew inside and out had dropped a bombshell that shattered my sense of security. Her suggestion hung in the air, suffocating and surreal. She wanted to spend a week sleeping with other men. My thoughts spiraled, unable to find a foothold. How could the woman who had shared my bed, my life, and my dreams even consider such a degrading proposal? "I mean it, Matthew," she said again, her tone unsettlingly steady, as if she were casually discussing a change in our vacation plans. I couldn't bring myself to respond. Fury roared within me, a wild beast clawing to be released, but years of restraint kept it caged. I sat there, paralyzed, desperately clinging to the hope that I had misunderstood her. Maybe she was joking. Maybe this was some bizarre test of my character. But deep down, I knew there was no jest in her words. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded proposition. The seeds of this moment had been sown days earlier, at a backyard barbecue hosted by our friends Jim and Linda. What had started as a simple, carefree gathering took a turn I could never have anticipated. The evening began innocently enough. The savory aroma of burgers on the grill mingled with the sound of clinking beer bottles and cheerful chatter. As the night wore on and the drinks flowed more freely, someone suggested a game of truth or dare. Normally, I wouldn't participate in such silliness, but I went along for the sake of the group. It all seemed harmless, until Linda turned to her friend Melissa with a sly grin and asked, "So, how's the whole cuckold thing going with you and Kevin?" I almost choked on my drink. Cuckold? Surely I'd misheard. My mind raced as Melissa responded with unnerving nonchalance. "Oh, it's been amazing," she said, her tone light and casual. "Kevin's totally into it, and we've never been closer." I exchanged incredulous glances with a few others, but to my surprise, some of the women nodded in agreement, as if this were a perfectly reasonable topic of conversation. My stomach turned as I glanced at Viviana, expecting her to share my disbelief. But she didn't. Instead, she calmly sipped her wine, her face betraying no trace of shock. Jim leaned toward me, his smirk widening. "What about you, Matthew? Ever thought about something like that?" "Thought about what?" I snapped, already irritated by his insinuation. "Letting Viviana have a little freedom," he said with a chuckle, as if he were revealing some grand secret of happiness. I shook my head vehemently. "Not a chance," I replied, my voice sharp. But the seed had been planted, a tiny, insidious thought that I dismissed too easily. I didn't realize then how quickly it would take root. The proposal. In the days following the barbecue, something shifted between Viviana and me. We shared a week of unexpected passion and intimacy, reminiscent of the early days of our relationship. I thought it was a rekindling of our bond, a sign of a fresh start. But my hopes were dashed when Viviana revealed the true reason behind her newfound intensity. We were sitting together on the couch after dinner when she turned to me with an almost childlike smile. "Matthew, can we talk?" she asked sweetly. "Of course," I replied, still basking in the glow of our recent closeness. "You know I love you, right?" she began, her voice soft and deliberate. Yes, I said, though a faint sense of unease began to creep in. I've been thinking, she continued, leaning in slightly, her tone dripping with artificial warmth. There's something I'd like to try, something that could bring us even closer. A cold weight settled in my stomach. What are you talking about? I asked warily. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke with a sweetness that felt almost mocking. I want to sleep with other men for a week. Her words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just shocking. It was an unthinkable betrayal, delivered with a disturbingly casual air. Absolutely not, I said firmly, my voice shaking with anger. Viviana's lips pursed into a pout, her eyes wide and imploring. Oh, don't be like that, Matthew. It's not about not loving you. It's about trying something new. This could actually make us stronger. Stronger? I snapped. How could letting you sleep with other men possibly help our marriage? It's about trust, she said, her voice softening. And freedom. Don't you trust me? My laugh was bitter. Clearly I shouldn't. No woman who loves her husband would suggest something like this. For a moment, something cold flickered in her eyes. Maybe you're not as open-minded as I thought, she said, her tone cutting, before standing and leaving the room. That night, as I lay awake, fury burned through me. If she thought she could treat me as a fool, she was mistaken. I wasn't about to let her destroy our marriage without a fight. The plan. I spent the next few days crafting a response. I played the role of the supportive husband, feigning interest and asking her to elaborate on her idea. How do you imagine this working? I asked. Have you thought about who you'd consider? Her eyes lit up with excitement, completely oblivious to my true intentions. The first step was reaching out to Jenna, Viviana's closest friend. I knew Jenna had harbored feelings for me for years, even if she'd never acted on them. That was about to change. I arranged a meeting under the guise of seeking advice, painting myself as the wounded husband grappling with an unthinkable betrayal. Jenna hesitated, but her resolve wavered after a few drinks. That night, I crossed a line I never thought I would, ensuring I captured everything on camera, not for sentiment, but for leverage. The showdown. A week later, I told Viviana I had agreed to her idea, but with one condition. We'd share a romantic evening together beforehand. She eagerly agreed, her enthusiasm uncontainable. We dined at an upscale restaurant, laughing and reminiscing as if we were newlyweds. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt the warmth of our early days, but I couldn't forget the betrayal beneath her smile. After dinner, I suggested we spend the night at a luxury hotel. Once we were alone, I pulled out my phone and handed it to her. Her face turned pale as she scrolled through the photos of Jenna and me. What is this? She stammered, her voice trembling. This, I said, my voice icy, is what betrayal looks like. Her tears came fast and heavy. You cheated on me? She whispered, her voice breaking. You wanted freedom, I replied coldly. Now you know what it feels like. Her sobs filled the room, but I felt no sympathy. She had sown the seeds of betrayal, and now she was reaping the bitter harvest. You asked for this, Viviana. Now you'll experience the weight of betrayal from the other side. She tried to defend herself, insisting there was no comparison, but I cut her off. Her protests meant nothing to me now. I had her exactly where I wanted, and I wasn't about to stop. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I handed her divorce papers. Her face revealed her shock, struggling to comprehend the gravity of the situation. Sign them, I commanded, my voice cold and firm, or these photos will be made public. Panic consumed her features. You wouldn't, she murmured, trembling. Try me, I replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. You wanted to play games, Viviana? Now we'll play by my rules. Cornered and defeated, she began to cry. The enormity of her situation crushed her spirit. She'd lost everything, her pride, her illusions, and now her marriage. But I wasn't finished. Before she could fully sign her name on the documents, I snatched them away, tucking them neatly into my briefcase. Her tear-streaked face twisted in despair, but I felt no pity. Mercy had no place here. The man who once fought for our marriage was long gone. That version of me died when she decided to turn me into a pawn in her pursuit of selfish desires. You thought this was a game? I told her, my tone devoid of emotion. But you ignored the most basic truth. Actions have consequences. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. I watched her crumble. A strange mixture of satisfaction and disgust filled me as I saw how easily she had destroyed the life we'd built together. "Matthew, please," she finally whispered, her voice cracking. "We don't have to do this. I made a mistake. I see that now." "A mistake?" I shot back. "Calling it that is an insult to every mistake ever made. You didn't just stumble, Viviana. You planned to dismantle our marriage for some delusional fantasy. You thought I'd sit back while you indulged in other men. Now, faced with the fallout, you want forgiveness?" Her head shook as she sobbed. I wasn't thinking clearly. I thought we needed something different. Different? I spat. What we needed was trust, loyalty, and respect. But you threw all of that away for what? A fleeting thrill? A week of gratification? Was it worth it? Her cries filled the room, but my sympathy was dead. All I saw was a woman who had shattered our bond beyond repair. My revenge wasn't limited to ending our relationship. It was calculated, thorough, and designed to leave no room for recovery. Viviana thought tears and apologies could undo the damage, but she had no idea the lengths I'd gone to ensure her downfall. For years, she'd relied on me financially. Since leaving her job 2 years ago to focus on herself, I'd provided everything. Yet she never took the time to understand our finances, assuming divorce would entitle her to half of everything. What she didn't realize was that I'd already taken steps to protect myself. The house, solely mine. The car, in my name. Our savings, locked in trusts she couldn't touch. With the help of a relentless lawyer, I'd ensured she would walk away with nothing. As she sat on the hotel bed, broken and weeping, I delivered the final blow. "Do you even realize what you've done to yourself?" I asked, towering over her. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're leaving this marriage with nothing," I stated bluntly. "No house, no car, and not a single cent from our savings." Her face turned ghostly white. "But we're married. I'm entitled to half." I smiled coldly. "You would be if you understood our finances, but everything's under my name. Every single thing." Panic overtook her. "No, that's not possible." "It's already done," I replied. Desperation flashed in her eyes as she stood. "I'll fight this. I'll get a lawyer." "Go ahead," I said indifferently. "Without money, good luck finding one. Even if you do, I'll bury you in legal fees before you see a dime." Her lips quivered as she tried to argue, but I silenced her. "You wanted freedom? Here it is. You're free of me, free of this marriage, and free of everything you once valued." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed back onto the bed, overcome by the weight of her choices. But I wasn't done. Viviana had built her identity on her image, the perfect wife, the accomplished woman who had it all. I dismantled that illusion piece by piece. I compiled a damning video with photos of me and another woman, alongside recordings of Viviana's confessions about wanting other men. I sent it to everyone in our inner circle. Her phone erupted with calls and messages as she sat in shock, reading the fallout. "What have you done?" she whispered. "The truth," I replied. "The truth you were so eager to embrace. Now everyone knows who you really are." Her reputation disintegrated overnight. Friends, family, even casual acquaintances turned their backs on her. I left her in that hotel room, shattered and humiliated. The divorce proceedings concluded swiftly. With no resources to fight, she walked away with nothing. Rumors reached me later. She struggled to find a place to live and eventually settled in a small, dingy apartment. Job offers were scarce, and her once thriving social circle dwindled to a few pitying acquaintances. As for me, I thrived. Free from deceit, I rebuilt my life and rediscovered happiness. I felt no regret for what I'd done. Viviana had made her choices, and she paid the price. The last I heard, she worked a menial job as a receptionist, scraping by with barely enough to survive. She had lost everything she once held dear, the security, the comfort, and the love of a man who had once been willing to give her the world. all for a fleeting moment of indulgence. Now, she was left with nothing. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.